Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Campus Conversations, the Shawnee Community College podcast. I am joined with Dr. Tim Taylor once again, and we have kind of started a series, and that was the intention, but it's really kind of morphed and grown into even more information and details as we look at how change has come not only to society, but obviously how it impacts higher education, which then of course impacts what we do here at Shawnee Community College. So
yeah, I think the vision for this was broader than we both anticipated when we first started this journey down the path of trying to discover why Shawnee Community College is doing what we're doing strategically. When I did the research on this, things kind of made sense. I mean, I knew I had a vision for what I wanted to talk about, the changes, how they have occurred in higher education in the past, and the future. I mean, the future of higher education and the technologies, the demographic, the technological and economic changes that are happening. I knew I had that vision. I've had that vision for quite a few years and seen how this played out in these industries that we're going to talk about today. And then talking about these industries and really going into the depth of how these industries transform themselves out of the industrial model into a digital age, I think was also interesting, but I didn't realize how much content was actually there,
right,
at the end of the day. And then that only tells part of the story. I mean, the rest of it is, okay, now that we've seen how education's changed in the past and what the future likely might be and why that likely future will happen given what's happened in these other industries, how does this affect the higher ed industry?
right.
And then how after that, where does Shawnee College fit within that spectrum of change? So we got a lot of content, and hopefully the users will enjoy what we're doing, because I know I certainly do. And it really does provide a very strong rationale from my perspective on why we're doing what we're doing. So
yeah. And this is really, if you're keeping score at home, this is part 3 of the series that we've kind of decided to move that goalpost further down the field, because we don't know how many episodes this particular topic is going to spur. But we know today for sure we're going to be talking about the music industry, and Dr. Taylor will explain why it's all kind of connected here. But we also want to encourage and remind you that if you have questions or comments or want your opinion heard on the Campus Conversation podcast, email podcasts@shawneecc.edu. I know Dr. Taylor has been looking forward to some engagement with that, and we really highly encourage, or reach out to us through social media. But these are designed to make people think and kind of understand better what Shawnee Community College is doing and how society or the things that are going on around us impact little Southern Illinois as well.
Right. When we're near the end of this, I'm going to lay it out now, but I want to kind of remind the audience what we're trying to do is kind of model, in a sense, an adaptation or disruption in the way presidents communicate, the way leaders within the education environment communicate with people. I mean, we're now putting this into digital content where people can have access 24/7, 365 on their own terms, right?
Yeah.
And so we're practicing kind of what we feel the future of higher education is going to be as well.
So today we're talking music, and I know this is a subject that you are very passionate about.
If anybody knows me at all, they know I've been in the music, interested in music my entire life. Played in bands and played music, and just went to a Metallica concert with my oldest son and watched bands that I grew up watching when I was younger. And I'm very passionate about music. Before we get started, though, I think we have to give credit to some of this work is really built off of the ideas of Dr. Art Levine and Scott Van Pelt from their Upheaval of Higher Education book. I would encourage anybody that's interested in learning more detail about a lot of the topics that we're talking about to really look at that book, download it, buy it from Amazon, however you want to consume it. But it's an outstanding book. It helped me really capitalize my ideas or galvanize, probably is a better word, and move these thinking forward, and it really put me on a path to doing the research that I needed to do to be successful as a president.
Sounds good. And again, we encourage you, if you have questions, reach out to us, and Dr. Taylor will be more than happy to answer those questions here on the podcast. Or if you have something you want to just kind of
questions yet?
No questions, but if you
man.
want to keep it a private conversation, we'll email back and forth as well. But we are looking forward to having future episodes where we are answering and talking about your questions. So let's start the conversation with music.
All right. Well, remember, the first episode was really aimed at taking a look at higher education, how it transformed. Basically from the agrarian model throughout the first industrial revolution and then the second industrial revolution, once everything kind of standardized and moved forward from about 2000 or 1900 on. And so just looking how higher education transformed. The second one was kind of, again, looking at the future, trying to figure out what might cause higher education to transform. This one is really to try to look at other knowledge-based industries. We're going to start with music today. Maybe we'll get to film soon, and after film, we're going to look at the newspaper industry. And there's a lot of similarities with how those industries transformed, and they're all knowledge-based economic entities. And so it sounds kind of weird, right? But I'll make the case of it.
Well, and and I've looked at the notes, and as you really start to digest it and think about it, I mean, it makes perfect sense that these are all connected, and have seen some major changes, disruptive changes in their history as well, and in the future. So we really need to be aware of this as educators,
right,
of what's going on.
Because the whole purpose of looking at these other industries, or what I call looking around, is so that we can draw parallels from what happened with them and what has happened or what will potentially happen in the higher education space. And so I'm going to probably do a little bit of going back and forth, and just like what might happen in the higher ed industry or so on. But I think it's really effective at creating a sense of urgency around the changes that we need to be working on at the college. And so this to me is probably the most interesting of all of the three, although
Sure.
I think the second was probably the most important, but these are probably the most interesting.
Alrighty. Let's dig right in then and talk a little bit about history of music.
Okay, so what I want to talk about right now is understand the how and why.
Sure.
Music, and maybe even the how, why, and the extent of the change, and learn what these music industry did and did not do, right? They have had all kinds of opportunities
Sure.
over the years. And we were going to talk about the demographic as well, changes that occurred, the economic and technological changes that occurred within this industry. And then we'll do the same for film and music and news. But those are the things that we're going to do as we look at this change. So getting into it, I know we're here finally. Music kind of, public consumption of music kind of started in like 1900. Okay, and so it was in New York on 28th and Broadway, and it's if you've been watching movies your life, you had to come across the terms Tin Pan Alley, right? That's really where it first started. So Tin Pan Alley, what that was a bunch of composers and singers and publishers producing sheet music, and they played it on the piano, right? That's what that was.
Yeah.
And people would come around and they would listen and they would sell their sheet music and so forth. But two inventions, so technology, the impact of technology started changing that. The first was Edison invented the name Edison. He's kind of the entertainment guru.
Right.
You kind of put him with the light bulb, but he was like the father of most of this entertainment, especially in the music and film industry. So he invented the gramophone, the first record player. I remember my grandparents, they had
Your grandma had a gramophone?
Exactly.
Sorry, dad joke there. We need the sound effects on here.
Yeah, really. But big old
Yeah.
thing. It's kind of an icon today, even in some music and film stuff. But Edison invented the gramophone, and then later on, there was the Victrolas. You know, so I'm trying to remember the movie. I just saw Untouchables, where Sean Connery's cranking the Victrola and moving on. So the technologies were there, and with those two pieces of technology that were invented, of course, record sales became the thing, and they boomed. In 1900, they went with the invention of those technologies, it went from 4 million records to, what was it, 30 million records, something like that.
Wow.
And so there became a battle then over the sheet music. And so publishers, they lost the battle, and record companies became the owners of the recording rights. So the publishers wanted to retain the recording rights, but the record companies then that were producing the vinyls at the time, they won this battle. So there was a legal battle over content. And that's a theme you're going to hear in all of these industries. There's lots of legal battles that occur over content. But in 1910, there was rival technology came along. You know, if you've seen some of these, particularly in pianos, where they had the cylinders, and then these flat discs came out, and that's really kind of something that came out and was technology that kind of came and went, you know, with as more technology was invented, and it really kind of depended on the adoption of the industry on what they wanted to use. It became more of a cost model, you know, where something became, when there was enough of it, it became cheap enough that they could produce it, and when there wasn't, then they didn't use it. So, but the three music companies then were the first to evolve. Edison, of course, was one. Columbia.
Yep.
Anybody heard of Columbia?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And then Victor, and they dominated this industry for a while. But the thing about them is, at first, it wasn't always just the content. They also developed the talent behind it.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to understand. Developing the talent, developing the content, kind of like educators develop courses, and we develop the teachers. It's that same kind of model. But then again, you know, that worked for a few years, maybe a decade or so, and then guess what? Marconi invented the radio.
Yes.
And so the radio, if you kind of look back in the agrarian area, remember the telegraph?
Yeah.
The radio was like a wireless telegraph. Now you could communicate wirelessly across and produce music across the airwaves. And so that was adopted more quickly than records because people didn't need a device to listen other than the radio. And so in the 1920s, news, you know, you see movies about it all the time where they're listening to the news, you know, post World War I and after, and then the Roaring '20s and things like that. But sporting events, you know, boxing was big, live concerts, you know, an evening at the Met, that kind of stuff. So by 1930, 60% of the households all had radios.
Wow.
And my grandma had one of those old big Zenith, looks like a piece of furniture. AM radio, you know, and the dial in and big old circle. It's really kind of cool. I got that actually up in my attic.
Oh, that's nice. That's awesome.
I actually had Craig Bradley to appreciate this. I had to work on it to get it to work, but it actually fired up.
Oh, nice.
So
yeah, they don't make those kinds of things like they used to.
it's hard to find the parts to even fix them. Luckily, I had some from my old days at SIU and was able to get it running. I hope it still runs because we put it up in the attic because we didn't have a place for it in the house.
That's very cool.
But anyway, the record companies then started feuding with the radio stations because it was over control of music, you know, because we want to sell records or some music media, and the radio's like,
Yeah.
Okay, so the FCC was established in 1934, and then started talking about, you know, the rules for what radio stations could and could not do, creating airspace and things, so that AM 940 operated within a certain bandwidth, and then 970 or 50 or 60 then had this bandwidth, and so you could only broadcast over. And so the FCC came in to do that, segregate the market a little bit, and that kind of helped create a proliferation of more radio stations, right? Because now there's more opportunities to be able to broadcast within your particular bandwidth. And so then in 1940s, there were a lot of mergers, a lot of bankruptcies and acquisitions. Of course, that's a big strategy for the more powerful companies, is to acquire those that come up and showing signs of success, have adapted to some new technology and been successful. So they don't have to reinvent it, they just buy it, and that's pretty standard operations. But then RCA Victor was one of the companies that emerged, in EMI, and then CBS Records, and they controlled the entire music value chain. They produced the records, they managed the talent, and they distributed the content. So that was the 40s. They also, those companies, they controlled the creative inputs. And so they had a formula, kind of we know that this will sell, right?
Yeah.
And so the creative inputs included the artist, the lyricist, the composers, and the sound engineers, right? So those were all new jobs that were created as part of this new model. And these companies managed everything. They managed marketing, they managed the recording, they had A&R artists, and I had to look this up, repertoire agents discovered the talent, signed them to the label, and the record companies partnered with these radio stations then to promote the sales of these albums or music. So as 1947, as FCC started really getting feet under them, and ultimately the number of radio stations doubled in just 7 years.
Wow.
Just by segregating the airspace. And as a result, the record companies started to feel marginalized a little bit, because now there's more competition for their product in different media that they really didn't control, at least at first. So the radio station could do, instead of recording a night at the Met, the radio station could produce it live. And so as time went on in the mid to late 40s, you heard indie record labels, stations coming up with more marginalized content. So that's kind of how folk music came to be. So some stations would specialize, and it's still the same in a lot of markets. You still got country music stations. You still have folk music, rhythm and blues, country. And most notably, by the end of the 40s, rock and roll, right? And by the end of, by the start of 1950-ish, basically there were 4 major record labels that were probably all familiar. I mean, if you got any age on you at all, that RCA Victor, CBS, Columbia, Capitol, and Decca.
Yes.
I mean, you have to be a little older to remember Decca. But there was certainly a rise of Decca in that time frame. These 4 companies produced 81% of the weekly top 10.
Wow.
4 years, dude. 4 years. But rock and roll was problematic for these companies and these labels because it was grounded in rhythm and blues, which is more Black American, ethnic, minority driven. And we were in the 50s, we were in de facto segregation. And so the majors avoided playing things that sounded like race music. That's what they call it, race music. So that's the start, of the 50s. And it was a risky proposition for the industry because most of their, consumers were white middle-class individuals. And so they defaulted to this tried and true model of what had worked for them in the 30s and 40s. So they stuck to that Tin Pan Alley sound. If you listen to the musics from the 20s to the 40s, for the most part, it's pretty formulaic. And it's hard really to differentiate some artists from the 20s like a Dorsey to what's his name, Basie.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, if you're an aficionado, they're going to say, "Man, you're crazy." There's complete differences, but for the most part, for the general ear, I think most people would say that they sounded, not a lot of advance in that, as artists moving forward. But as rock became more popular, the majors started experimenting, and they tried to minimize this risk by creating other shoot-off labels, I guess is what the best way to call it. But instead of embracing the artists that actually developed the music, they would develop people like Bill Haley and Big Joe Turner and Buddy Holly, who took the music of the rhythm and blues and kind of put a white face on it. They put they had a formula that they felt like their middle class could accept, and they taught these artists to sing and act and dance this way. So they groomed their talent so that it would be acceptable. I mean, and that's not, I mean, if you've watched any movies or read any books on Elvis, he talks about how he was resisting that from the very get-go. I mean, his Memphis roots was really sunk into from the Mississippi Delta Blues region. So, but that's something that started to change when RCA's purchased Elvis from Sun, which was one of those shoot-offs, right? Because Sun was the first ones to sign Elvis, and he kept him on top of the chart. That really, for years, right? And made millions of dollars for them. That really changed the way the record labels looked at rock and roll. And so, people would argue who had the most influence on rock and roll. I mean, like him or not, Elvis made a major impact for all of the artists that are around today.
Yeah, definitely.
In the way that the record companies had to evolve their thinking. So by 1956, instead of just 4 record labels, there became 25.
Wow.
It's because all of these shoot-offs.
Yeah.
And so 25 record labels were represented in the top 50 charts. But by 1962, the 8 largest record labels captured 46% of the market. So, 4 to 25 producing, and then, as the 25 started to acquire more and more again, and they would blend, it got down to 8. But that's the weakest point, where the 8 largest only captured 46% of the market. That was what the record industry says is the weakest point for the major stronghold in the past. Of the major labels that were out in the music industry prior to rock and roll, so the ones who didn't want to adapt, only 2 survived.
Wow.
CBS and RCA.
Okay.
So commercially, rock developed and thrived due to the support of the indie labels. Some majors acquired the independents, while some majors partnered with independents, using them as incubators, for prospective talent. In 1960, though, so only 10 years later, only a decade later, after initially rejecting rock, majors were signing artists like Hendrix, Joplin, Stones, Zeppelin, Sabbath, and lots and lots of others, So 10 years after, it had totally changed the way it approached the development of artists. And as a result of them embracing those artists, I love Sabbath, I love Zeppelin, love Stones. A lot of other genres started to develop. Heavy metal, that's really my center.
Yeah.
Punk, I love punk too. Disco came and went. Grunge came and went. But hip hop has also emerged from that and has lasted for many, many years as well. So, the spinoffs, I think it's important to understand that there's been, rock was kind of it was Tin Pan Alley sound.
Right.
And then rock came, pretty much the Tin Pan Alley became niche. Rock was too large, a lot of people loved the beats, and then they started to emerge by taste.
Yeah.
And so that's why you have 10 or 12 different flavors of heavy metal now, or
Right.
10 or 12 different flavors of hip hop, rhythm and blues. So that's what happens, and people are able to. Well, let me ask you, what do you think that those different? What's your theory on why those different types of genres emerged?
Why they emerged?
Yeah.
I think part of it was the consumer was evolving and changing as well, and little kids were becoming teenagers, and they didn't want to listen to or adapt to the things that their parents were listening to and doing. So
yeah, they experimented, right, and they tried new things, and it sounded good to them.
Yeah.
And then others sounded good to them. So because the music label started to lose control, or in some ways of the artist, of the composers, of the talent, that came from outside of the industry, and that created a new market in a sense. And so punk took off because disaffected youth had an opportunity to go bang their head and make their parents mad in a different way, and had a different attitude, and it was a whole lifestyle for people change. And so that all came from the grassroots era.
Yeah.
And not from a corporate control standpoint. It's kind of like education in some ways, having a corporate control over the education content. We're starting to see startups from around the country, around the world, that are looking at education a little bit differently, and people are starting to take notice and engaging in it. So I think it's important to understand that ebb and flow happens. Moving forward, and there is a potential for all kinds of new things to happen in the education space in the future.
Yeah, it's again, it's fascinating how it's all kind of connected, these different industries, and then how it all kind of ties in.
Right, and when I was first putting this together, that was the thing that kind of really started to I started asking that question: why are these things so interconnected? And that's where I came back with this idea. And this is the thing that Levine and Van Pelt really helped crystallize in my mind. It's the technology, it's the economy, and it's the demographic changes that link the three together. Looking and those things all were consistent, right? Because the technologies evolved. It impacted every area of the economy. The economy model, the economic models changed. The way to make money for these businesses changed, and of course the demographics were shifting and continue to shift. And so that's what's, I feel, the catalyst. But I think you're absolutely right. It's the evolution of the types of genres of music really was because new people were able to create content in their own way and without control of the vocal.
Yeah, and I think we're continuing to see that.
Oh, absolutely.
In all industries.
Yeah, it's not over. It's never over.
No.
It's a cycle.
Yeah.
And that's what I need us to do, is to recognize that cycle and where we are as an education institution within that cycle, as an education industry. So digital disruption then occurs in the music industry. So more technological change. So over time, records changed in size. They were pretty big initially, and then they kind of settled on a standard vinyl sized, what are they, 12-inch? 10-inch? I can't remember. 10.
Yeah.
I got so many albums, I should have brought some in.
Should have brought some in, yes.
But as these sizes changed, of course, the composition, the speed, the albums were originally, I can't remember what they originally were in the gramophone days, but then they changed it to 33 speed and then the 45s. The content changed because now instead of having 20 songs, you could have 3, 4, 5. So the capacity, and then the quality changed as well, right? Initially, 8 tracks were invented. I had one of those too. Some cassettes, and then we went to CDs. And so as the technology continued to evolve, then MTV came out in the 80s. Became another marketing vehicle for the music industry. What did not change was major control of the talent and production and promotion and distribution of this content, though, even with the digital change early on.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine too, though, that it had to be somewhat frustrating because before, you the consumer, were kind of at the mercy of whatever the radio station played and when they played it. Now I can pop in an 8-track, and I remember as a kid, my parents having the 8-track and putting that in and playing that in the car. Or, eventually my first car, I got a radio for Christmas that had the cassette player in it. And so, you're able now to kind of control that. And so I could see where the radio industry would be, maybe not crazy about that change either, because now they're losing those listeners to their formats or their content, and I kind of see that coming back around with podcasts. Unless I have someone else in the car with me, my radio all the time is on a podcast. I'm listening to different podcasts, so I could see where the radio industry would be a little bit, upset with the evolution of this portable now version of music.
Yeah, it wasn't a major concern at first because, and I probably didn't do a good job of explaining how that from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s and the 80s really kind of evolved. The record companies and the major labels, they evolved.
Mm-hmm.
They started understanding if we promote punk rock and the Sex Pistols is a band, we still can control that content. We still control the distribution model.
Yeah.
We will adapt and we will help them promote.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing with Peter Frampton in the 70s. There was a certain formulaic model that they knew would sell to a certain segment of the market. They still controlled the content, they still controlled the delivery, they still controlled the distribution, and so, and the promotion. Yeah, I think that's the word I was looking for. And so they learned to adapt to the different markets and promote it. They knew they wasn't going to sell it to everybody, but they knew there was enough market space there that would buy these records or this industry or this disc or this 8-track or cassette tape that it was worth the investment. So you started seeing a little bit of specialization within the major labels. So they would kind of create their own segments within the label. This was the rock section. This was the grunge section. And a lot of times they weren't the same people, and they didn't collaborate because they were trying to create different sounds for the consumers. So the record companies adapted, but the first chink in the armor, I think, for them, the first thing that really created a problem for them, make them take pause, was the invention of the CDR, the recordable CD. This diminished. This is where they started to see the diminishment of their control of content, because now the consumer could start to record their own content on a digital disc.
Because I can remember as a kid having the cassette tape and always having a blank tape ready to go in the radio, so when a song came on, I could record it. And obviously it's not the same as buying the cassette or whatever, because you got the DJ introducing it or whatever, but yeah. Did that have any kind of impact on it?
Well, with the cassette tape, you could record your own songs. So, a big thing in the 70s was you'd make a mixtape, right? Mm-hmm. So you'd make a mixtape with your friends and you'd go out and have a good time, and you would all listen to this mixtape. And this mixtape might be songs from one band, but it's likely songs from all your friends' bands. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they would cross genres. Sometimes you'd have friends that were more country and Western focused. And so you'd have a country and Western song on there, followed by, a Ted Nugent song or something along those lines. And so these mixtapes allowed the consumer to create their own, in a sense, content on a media that was It was difficult. You had to have, of course, a recorder, and you had to have these other songs. You had to buy them.
Yeah,
in
right.
order to record, or sometimes people would record them off the radio, but those always suck. Usually. But the CDR changed that in a sense because now the mix became high quality because you could actually take it off of another CD.
Okay, yeah.
And record it off that CD onto a CDR, and the quality was much better. So this enabled consumers really to capture songs without having to buy the whole album, right? And that's starting to get into the economic model, the way the labels had built them, because the labels had built it so you would have to buy an album. I mean, I bought thousands of albums, honestly, and each one of them had 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 songs on them. Most of them, 90% of them, only wanted a couple songs.
Yeah.
Or one song off of it, but I had to buy the whole album to get it. Right. And the album was $7, $8 at the time. They got up to $14, $15 back in the day. But I had to spend $14 or $10 to get something that I can one song that you could get it, copied from your friend onto a CDR.
I remember. I remember in the early 2000s that becoming more of a reality for me.
So a lot of consumers, everybody knows there's been illegal file sharing since the advent, but a lot of consumers like myself, I would record stuff that I bought and put it on a CDR and create my own mixtapes on CDR.
Yeah.
And a lot of people did that.
Yeah.
But what that did is, and what was missed, in my opinion, by the record companies, is they started missing the shift in consumer behavior. They didn't see that. They just wanted the one song, and they wanted it. They didn't want to buy the whole thing, and so the music industry kept creating and pushing that content or the distribution model in a way where you had to buy everything, and so that created some problems. But what we had seen in terms of technology is it became more mobile too. As you went to the cassette. Yeah. The 8-track you had to have a big 8-track player. I mean, even in a car it was okay. It was somewhat mobile, but in 1954, I guess you could say, when the transistor radio, the small transistor radio came out, and you can see all these beach movies where people, all the kids are running around with the little transistor radio up there. They made music mobile first, but by 25 years later, when we had the CDRs, what did we have? We had the Sony Walkman, right? We clipped it on our belts. We ran around, and it skipped. But it brought music. It emboldened consumers to want just the content that they wanted. They wanted to purchase just the content that they wanted. And when MP3s came out, gosh, that was about 2000?
Yeah. Early 2000s.
But most notably the iPod. We still call them iPods today.
Yeah.
It made music individualized. You had 24/7, 365 access to high quality content. Yeah. High quality, consumer driven. So then what happened? Napster, right? I think that, I can't remember when Napster was. It 2003, 2002? Yeah. But that really kind of hurt the music industry because it created a situation where consumers could freely share. I mean, before you had to purchase the CD in order to copy it. Somebody had to purchase it, and mostly that's what happened, I think. But Napster changed the rules. I mean, you could get any song you wanted, anytime you wanted, as long as you could find it online. Yeah. And at first Napster, I remember engaging with Napster some. I'll be honest with you. The quality was sucked though. I mean, it was like 64-bit, 128-bit songs, and so you kind of like didn't like it. But it got to the point, I think, where they would share higher quality songs. But the idea of freely accessing and downloading songs outweighed that quality loss. I mean, right? I mean, there was millions, if not billions, of downloads. I mean, in the record industry, really noticed
Yeah.
from a profit standpoint, but also their distribution model was started to be threatened. I mean, major. They were understanding, hey, no longer can we just put out a CD.
Yeah.
No longer, I mean, they still do, but
Right.
they don't sell much in CDs anymore.
And I think it was your guys, Metallica, that kind of went after Napster originally. Was
Yeah.
it? They kind of led the charge?
Yeah, well, that's the whole shift. I mean, now the artists
Yeah.
are getting hurt too. That was the
Right.
problem. The majors, a lot of people didn't care about the majors. They didn't see it, that they were actually taking money out of the artists' pockets. And for the big bands like Metallica, they were just providing, I don't want to speak for them, but I think they were just trying to provide a voice for some of the other
Sure.
partners within the
Right.
music industry, because of the small. They were afraid that smaller bands would never get their voice heard because of this kind of model.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you go buy a new band song?
If you can get it for free.
Right. And if you can get it for free, those new bands won't emerge because they will never be able to make
Right.
a living off of their music.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the voice Metallica tried to provide, and of course, people looked at it differently,
Mm-hmm.
and in some ways persecuted, Lars, and in particular because he had the most voice in the band. But
Yeah.
it did really change the distribution model for the music industry. And of course, what did the music industry try to do? They tried to stop it, right?
Right, sure.
Instead of figuring out a way to work with or adapt, they said, let's go to court. We're
Yeah.
going to sue you. And they did. And they lost over $1 billion in revenue over that time. They actually won the lawsuit, right?
Right.
But they lost the war. So
Yeah.
that's one of those examples of winning the battle
Yeah.
and losing the war. Post Napster, of course, a lot of people predicted the demise of the record industry, but of course, they've still adapted. They've
Yeah.
learned from their mistakes. And 2005, 6, 7, iTunes,
Yeah.
Apple.
Yeah, that's about right.
So I think that started to come out. An industry that was not RCA,
Yeah.
not Polygam or Polygram, came up with this distribution idea of how to do that and make money
Mm-hmm.
and respect copyright. And they began selling digital downloads. It never really generated the revenue compared to what the CDs did, but it was the first step in that evolution towards the cloud.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so, although Napster, the major disruptive impact of Napster was not the financial loss. It was the shift in consumer behavior again. And so, the lesson to learn here is, what is it that the consumer wants?
Mm-hmm.
What is it the student wants? Right?
Yeah.
What is it that they have adopted to? What are their expectations now? I think that's important for us. It doesn't matter what we think.
Mm-hmm.
We're the major labels.
Yeah.
What are the students telling us? What are the students doing? What are the consumers wanting? That's key. And so, of course, listeners, consumers, they develop this taste for digital on demand, low cost, and free access.
Mm-hmm.
See, I think the majors interpreted Napster a little bit the wrong way. They were seeing free,
Yeah.
and they thought it was about the content, when really what it was is about access.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted free access to the music. And for that, consumers are willing to pay
Mm-hmm.
for free access 24/7, 365, which is what we're seeing today
Yeah.
in things like Spotify,
Yeah.
Pandora, and those kinds of streaming services. There was a grand vision of a cloud back in 2005. The technology wasn't quite ready, the network, the computer technology. where you could have a jukebox
Mm-hmm.
that had all of the songs that you would ever want, any piece ever recorded on the internet. So that vision started to emerge in 2005 with the Apple iPod stuff. And so from the 60s, when technological advances allowed greater amounts of content to fit onto vinyl, the business model was to craft hit singles. And draw, we talked about drawing in and paying for full albums. At the turn of the 21st century, Napster offered consumers the opportunities to unbundle from the constraints of the album and break them into singles.
Mm-hmm.
So you've heard me talk about unbundling the credit hour.
Right.
We're wanting to unbundle that credit hour, break it up into modules. It's kind of like breaking it into singles. And of course, that changed what the music looked like, right?
Sure.
Not from a standpoint, but how it was actually packaged, right? And then around 2015, when technology actually caught up, the development of digital streaming started. And of course, that gave the consumers the access that they desired, 24/7, 365. There's no cost. Let me say it differently. The cost to creating a digital content is much less than creating a CD.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the physical materials. You don't
Right.
have the same production processes. It's much more. It's a higher quality product. You don't have the marketing and promotion model that you need to invest in. You don't have to invest as much in a lot of different things, and so that they could do it actually cheaper
Mm-hmm.
by putting it into a cloud, and the distribution had changed. So, in 95, when we were listening to a digital song, we had to purchase a CD. We had to procure a device to play a CD, like a Walkman, we had multi-disc CD
Mm-hmm.
players.
Oh,
We put
yeah.
them in the cars
Yeah.
and everything else.
Yeah.
Of course, those were prone to skipping.
Yeah. Especially
by
those Walkman ones.
Yeah. Well, if you hit a bump in your car.
Oh yeah, definitely.
At least in the old ones.
Yes.
You get a skip. But 2020, the same cost of producing a CD in 95, you could subscribe for one CD in 95. I can subscribe to Spotify for my whole family.
Wow.
Right? $15.
Yeah.
I pay a month for.
Yeah.
Whole family has access to Spotify. I used to buy a lot more than that in CDs a week.
Right. Sure.
I would spend $25, $30 sometimes.
You didn't do the 12 records for a penny?
Yeah, all those stores. Carbondale had a store right across from right off Illinois Avenue, right across from Gatsby's, where they had resale records.
Oh.
Matter of fact, I still think they got a couple stores there, but they had one there. I used to go there all the time when I went to SIU.
Yeah.
Bought albums. Then when I got kicked out of SIU and came back in the late 80s, they were selling CDs. I would go buy CDs, or you go buy 3 or 4 CDs for $5, and it may not be good, but at least you had to.
Right.
Sometimes you'd find something that you liked or
Yeah.
discover something new. So yeah, it was pretty cool. But now, $15 a month gets me anything.
Right. Yeah.
Everything. I can cross genres. I can pretty much listen to just about anything that's out there. And so with Apple Music, they adapted as well over the time. But now we have unlimited access to unlimited numbers of songs. And the devices are largely agnostic. It doesn't matter. I can play it on my car.
Mm-hmm.
I can play it on my phone. I can play it on my iPad.
Yeah.
Wherever I got a device, I can listen to those songs off that Spotify on my TV.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it does. You don't need a special CD player. You don't need a special DVD player. You need, the devices are inconsequential in a lot of ways, and so it's also changed the way consumers expect their content. Right? So for the record industry in 2019, album sales had declined by 15%. From roughly $84 million a year to $73, and digital sales were down from $400 million to slightly over $300 million. However, the consumption to see the explosive growth of on-demand audio streaming is in the 750 billion, nearly tripling
Wow.
the rest of the sales combined. And so that's a big change.
Yeah.
And for the record music industry, that's a good change because it's more profitable.
Yeah.
And so because they stuck through and actually learned from and had somewhat adapted to disruptive change within their environment, they're still being able to be successful today. And they really should be kind of looking out for what's the next evolution, right? So through, in summary, I guess throughout the 20th century, record labels, they had a firm grip on the distribution. They dictated the medium, the device, and the bundle, right? Every technological advanced, from the gramophone to the record player to the transistor radio to the Walkman to the iPod to the mobile device and beyond, has served to advance consumer demand for more portable and accessible content. More portable, accessible content. Credit hour, not as portable as we probably need it to be. It's accessible, coming to campus, sitting and listening to an instructor is only accessible for a few select individuals. 24/7, 365 access is the consumer.
So is this going to have to be a change that happens, and I guess we don't know exactly where to pinpoint it in the music industry, but with education, for example, in doing this, is this something that can start off on a grassroots effort, a smaller college, university level, regional, and then grow? Because I think we as consumers, as far as consuming education goes, it has been this formula. And I think there are probably some institutions that are adapting and changing to better serve the needs of their students.
I think the lesson of the indie labels from the 50s is valid here. As the education industry starts to realize what the consumer behavior actually is, we'll get competition from private companies. There'll be battles over knowledge content, legal battles. Those will be depending on how those get settled out in the courts. I think that will influence the outcome to some extent. But if the courts are consistent with the way they've ruled in the music industry, and you'll see also in the newspaper and film industries, it will create a market space where there's a lot of competition for it. And so those companies, schools who do it well, will start to capture consumer demand, and then larger institutions are going to take notice and say, if in order for us to maintain viability, then we're going to have to acquire in some ways. And I don't know what that acquisition looks like for public institutions, but I could see private companies being major competitors to the higher education space. And consumer demand then becomes, or consumer preference then becomes the deciding point, the deciding factor. So to answer your question, can smaller colleges like Shawnee do that? I think we do. I think we have that opportunity. If we can be creative and innovative, people will look to us and then figure out ways to try to integrate what we do well into what they do well. If we can become the strong, and this gets into the very end of it, but if we can become experts in the way something, let's say nursing education happens, if we can produce new models for that's successful, then people are going to want us to help them be able to do that. And we could create a subscription service where our region provides access to nursing training. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't partner with Logan and let Logan and have Logan be the experts in technology, automotive, let's say. They could become the experts in automotive, and then Rend Lake could become the experts in color. I mean, so, and develop those, and then there's 48 community colleges, and then we could all be experts at one thing and develop that and work with each other and trade services and so forth. And that kind of model could be effective. That's just one potential feature. So I do think that that's important. I do not know, and no one knows really how the private market's going to impact the public space. But I do think within the next 10 to 15 years, we have to be able to compete with VR. We have to be able to compete in using adaptive learning. We have to be able to find ways to unbundle our product. We have to find ways and be able to distribute our product to a 24/7, 365 access, and because that's what the consumers prefer. And if they don't find it, they just will go elsewhere. And that's what we saw during the COVID. I mean, the more badges, or the growth of badges, the growth of boot camps thing, we have to be able to make it affordable too. That was the key.
Right.
With the music industry, as they started unbundling, as they started trying different models of distribution and so forth, it became cheaper. And because it became cheaper, what I used to pay $15 for 10 songs, I can pay $15 for billions of songs.
Yeah.
And so it became scalable and shareable. And so that's what we had to do. How do we scale and share our content with our consumers in a way that they can have 24/7, 365 access? That's the challenge. That's the challenge faced by the music industry. That's the challenge education is facing. Shawnee in particular, I think there's still a regional demographic that needs access to, because they're going to be working locally. And so I think that provides, to me, that's still a cloudy, I don't know, I can't think through that. It feels like some of the regional aspects of that's important, because we talked about last month how the jobs are going to be evolving. We talked about how the job loss where you need a high school diploma, well, that's gone, and now you need at least some college moving after. We talked about how AI, VR, cloud-based stuff is changing the workspace, how robotics could enter in, which created this sense of need for reskilling for current employees, which is why our focus is on workforce and community education, scaling that. So people are going to start in one industry, and maybe 5-10 years later they're going to need to do something else, or maybe want to do something else, or maybe different elements of a job. So reskilling is important. So I think if we can figure out a way to do that well, because of the regional piece, because people are still going to live regionally, people are still going to work regionally, I think there's avenues for us that, people just geographically aren't going to go up to, Truman, Chicago to take nursing program.
Right.
So I think that's the unclear part, but to me, it's what we're doing prepares us the best we can for what we can see.
Yeah.
So,
and do you think that we'll still continue to, I can still buy that vinyl album and play it, but I can also fire up my phone and listen to Spotify? Will education be the same? Will we still have the option to do the traditional 15 credit hours per semester for 12 weeks?
We'll obviously have to.
Yeah. At least for now.
Well, we have to for a lot of reasons. One of them is the government, the legislation, the financial aid elements of it won't allow us to not follow the current aid.
Will that ever change, do you think?
It's changing now.
Yeah.
I mean, what we're seeing now is experimentation from the feds and DOE with policy, and they're allowing competency-based education to move forward. And so that's what happened in the late 1890s, once Taft, I think you remember me talking about Taft being elected and then they establishing the Carnegie Commission. When the government got by that, then the industrial model of education kind of just looked like it snapped overnight. And so I feel like that's something like that could happen with the education environment. But consumer demand will dictate it. I think the people who yearn for, and this, I hate to say it because it hurts me, but the people who yearn for this traditional education model are getting older.
Yeah, right.
And the new kids, the Zillennials, the Generation Z kids, they've already experienced learning online, forced to.
Right.
Yep. And so that's their appetite. And so their expectations are going to be just in time, 24/7, 365. If we don't give them that, somebody will.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think over time you'll see that, just like you saw a shift in the music industry from album sales to streaming. You'll see that same evolution from face-to-face time-based classes to 24/7, 365 digital access. Now that digital access could still be synchronous, and I don't want people to think that I'm talking about the difference between asynchronous or synchronous. But I can already log in and interact with people across the world digitally. We see Zoom technologies and we see Teams and different things that allow us to do that. But I think as the learning management systems adapt and we start to integrate virtual reality in and adaptive learning in, those online learning environments are going to become really robust, really quick, and probably can way outperform what a single faculty member can do in a classroom that's, coupled to a projector and a computer, or what is those old film?
Oh yeah, the overhead projector, the transparency ones. Yes.
Yeah, the transparency. So, I mean, as great as a faculty member as we have, as great as I thought I was, I could be outperformed easily with digital technology in a digital environment, which can connect people around the world. Your classroom is no longer necessarily limited by your geography.
Very good stuff. Very interesting, and I'm looking forward to diving into the next two industries as well as we continue this series.
I am as well, and please, folks, if you have questions, let us know. I would love to be able to respond to and answer questions. It helps us think through and learn things better. If there's something not clear or we didn't make a good point or you disagree, especially if you disagree, man, let's get engaged and see if we can work it out. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way to do that is to email podcast@shawneecc.edu. Of course, you can check out our website, shawneecc.edu, anytime. Find our episodes as well as on our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening and or watching, and have a great week.